Do you ever find yourself on social media and you see a friend post something that is not aimed at you? It seems to be part of a private conversation. Reading the epistles can be like that. Gentiles, circumcision, Israel, dividing wall. What does this have to do with us? Oh, well, skip to the next chapter or book. Certainly, that was my initial reaction to today's reading. But as I studied our passage, I found having just a little historical context made it much more personal and impactful for me. And I hope it will for you as well. So let's explore. By the way, I will be going through the passage verse by verse, so you may want to have a Bible, whether physical or on your phone, open to Ephesians 2 to follow along. Our passage begins in verse 11, which mentions circumcision. I'm not going to describe circumcision in detail. Ask your parents about it, or if you're too old for that, ask Andrew. Jokes aside, though, the key point is that circumcision was commanded by God as a way for Jewish men to distinguish themselves from non-Jews or Gentiles. Indeed, circumcision was one of the most famous Jewish distinctives, along with dietary and Sabbath rules. These three distinctives are sometimes called the works of the law by Bible scholars, with the law, in this context here, meaning the Jewish Torah. Now, if you know anything about Judaism, you know that 10 commandments are the most important. You may also know that the Torah contains hundreds of laws on many topics. Circumcision, the food laws, and the Sabbath, the three works of the law, are not the most important commandments to Jews then and now, but they were significant because they clearly marked the Jews as distinct and different from the Gentiles around them. In the first century, the Jews were an oppressed minority group within the Roman Empire, which meant that there was incredible pressure on them to fit in. This is not unique to the ancient world. Migrants and minority groups in every modern country, even in enlightened Canada, have to carefully navigate their relationship with the dominant culture. And of course, we often feel analogous pressures on a personal level. I must confess, I love my phone. And I'd certainly say it helped me stay connected with people this past year. But at the same time, in my experience, having constant access to social media and the opportunity to post, comment, and react at any moment of the day is a very mixed blessing, with seemingly huge consequences for saying or doing the wrong thing. Or even if you're not on social media, you know what it's like to start a new job or go to a new school and wonder what all the unspoken rules are, and if you can break any of them without being completely ostracized. Jews in the first century had this experience on a daunting scale. Some conformed to the surrounding Greco-Roman culture, and others did not, trying hard to maintain their distinctive laws and practices, to remind themselves of who they were. This effort was a success, preserving Jewish culture and religion, even with their homeland occupied and their temple destroyed. But in the years after the ministry of a marginal rabbi from Nazareth, a new Jewish sect emerged and began to attract remarkable interest, even among non-Jews. And as this new sect grew, the distinctive laws and practices that had been so helpful in preserving Jewish identity became a barrier to the inclusion of Gentiles. Indeed, before the Jewish temple was destroyed, a literal dividing wall separated the outer court of the Gentiles from the inner courts, where only Jews could enter on penalty of death. The Romans toppled the wall and the rest of the temple in 70 AD, but it remained a powerful metaphor for the laws and practices that separated Jews from Gentiles and Jewish Christians from Gentile Christians. Of course, dividing walls are not only found in the ancient world. Verses 12 and 19 refer to aliens, the same term we use today for non-citizens. And though Canada may not have actual walls along its borders, we've learned in the past year that citizenship is still decisive for where you may and may not go. so too in the ancient world. Both Gentiles and Jews were exquisitely familiar with the benefits of Roman citizenship and the perils of not having it. In Acts 22, Paul was arrested, chained, and about to be flogged and tortured without a trial until he announced his Roman citizenship. Non-citizens were not so lucky. This is why our passage uses citizenship as a metaphor for being part of the people of God. Let's go back to verse 12. Without Christ, you were aliens, excluded from citizenship in Israel and strangers to God's promises of hope. But now, verses 13 and 19, but now Christ has brought you near and made you a citizen in Israel, the commonwealth of the saints. How does this work? You could write a book on everything that's going on in verses 14 to 16, and someone probably has. The verses themselves give a summary version. Christ broke down the wall between Jews and Gentiles by giving his own body to cancel, nullify, and set aside the law with its commandments. Just like the dividing wall in the temple, the law, especially these famous works of the law, like circumcision, had the effect of dividing Jews and Gentiles into two hostile groups. In contrast, the blood of Christ's body shed on the cross has reconciled both groups to God, making peace and creating one new humanity. There's a lot to unpack here, and I only have like 5 minutes left. So rather than diving deep into the theology of how Christ's death works, look at the contrast from the beginning to the end of this passage. At the beginning, we are without Christ, aliens, strangers, having no hope, without God, far away, divided, hostile, and ruled by law. And then by the last verses, we have been brought near. We are at peace, no longer strangers and foreigners, fellow citizens with the saints, members of God's household, and being built into a dwelling place for God. This is good news. Most of us are Gentiles and beneficiaries of this change, being included in the household of God and the new humanity, all because of Christ, who is not only the center of our faith, but the crux of this passage. Christ is the turning point that turns hostility into peace, aliens into fellow citizens, and strangers into a new household. Okay, but so what? It's nice that this happened, but the Gentiles have been included in the church for 2 millennia, and these days almost no one seriously asks if Christians need to do the works of the law. So this passage is hardly relevant anymore, right? I can see at least 2 applications today. First, it is a tragic irony of church history that not long after Paul, Peter, and other early Jewish Christians argued eloquently for the inclusion of Gentiles in the people of God, the Gentile faction became dominant, turned around, and started condemning Jews, especially those who did not follow Jesus. Indeed, there are strong arguments that the roots of anti-Semitism are in Christian soil. Sure, the Romans oppressed the Jews, but they crushed everyone indiscriminately. It's Christian theologians and leaders, even my fave, Augustine, that propagated laws, myths, and stereotypes that targeted Jews specifically. Yes, Jesus made peace between Jews and Gentiles and created one new humanity out of the 2 groups. But ever since, we have tried very hard to forget this so that we might resume hostilities. But you might say, even if Christians in many times and places have been anti-Semites, we here today know better, right? Right? I don't know. Maybe. I'll let our Jewish neighbors answer that question. But regardless, our passage has another point about how we envision church together. Again, Christ abolishes the law with its commandments, including requirements like circumcision, which divided the people of God and put them at odds with each other. That particular issue is less pressing today. But I wonder, is our church free of walls that create hostility, laws that divide us into groups, and the intense pressure to fit in? Speaking personally, I know that I'm regularly tempted to wage war on certain Christians, especially on those who have many commandments and ordinances that I disagree with. And to be sure, there are definitely habits and ideas in the church that need criticism urgently. But as verse 20 makes clear, the cornerstone of the church is not my preferences. And I can't just throw out any building blocks or people who don't fit in with my ideas of what is right. If you're not up on your masonry, I learned recently that a cornerstone was traditionally a stone with a perfect 90-degree corner, which builders could use to align the other stones and ensure the whole structure would be well built and true. Thus, the metaphor of Christ as the cornerstone means this new household of God is straight and true, built on Christ and fitting together through him. Indeed, verses 21 and 22 call this new structure a temple, a dwelling place for God, a spiritual replacement for the physical temple that had been destroyed. And we, you and I, Christians we like and Christians we don't, Jewish Christians and Gentile Christians, are all part of this building project. And we fit in through Christ rather than because we say or do all the right things. So, as challenging as it may be, let us not divide any groups that God has joined together, but instead learn to grow together as one humanity in the peace of Christ and the one Spirit of God. Amen.